Hello, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of Chop It Up. Before we get into today's episode, I want to be sure to tell you guys to hit the subscribe button below and go check out our full episodes on Spotify and YouTube. So whether you just want to listen to the podcast or you want to enjoy the show visually, you can check us out on Spotify and YouTube. Shorter clips are going to be up on social media, on Instagram and TikTok. So be sure to go check those short clips out as well on our social media. But today, very special episode, special guest on the podcast, good friend of mine, the site editor of the Huskies Wire and the host of the Locked On Huskies podcast, one of the biggest growing media outlets in the Seattle area, I might add as well. Roman Tomashoff. Roman, thank you for coming on, man. We really appreciate it.
Carter, it's great to be here. And I mean, you gotta say, because if we are that fastest growing, I appreciate that compliment, but you deserve all the praise for that. You're doing fantastic work for us on the social media side of things. It's just wonderful to have you aboard, and it's wonderful to be here because I got my Darrelle Revis Patriots jersey on. I'm ready to talk draft. One of my favorite times of the year. It should be a national holiday, truly.
I agree 100%. And Roman pretty much already told us what this episode is going to be going on about. We got the NFL draft coming up Thursday in Green Bay. I'm not sure who the genius is that said, let's have the NFL draft in Green Bay in April, but here we are. So we're going to be giving you guys our top 10 picks, just kind of a mock draft situation. Going to hit on some big sleepers that we think could be going in the later first round or even, on day 2 or 3. And then we'll finish it up with our beloved Patriots and what they're going to do in this draft, because I think they're in a very interesting spot, but an exciting spot. Let's start it off with the mock draft. We have the Titans taking the number 1 overall pick. I'm sure we'll have the same pick on this one, but I'm going to let you go first.
Yeah, this one was pretty simple. Carter, I don't know how you decided to do your mock draft. I did mine here as what I think is going to happen. I always enjoy what I would do sort of scenarios, but in this one, we're so close to draft, it's got to be Cam Ward, right? Where I think he's fine. Like, I think that's the best way to put it. Where in any other draft, we're not having this conversation with him at number one. Like, we look at we look at the last couple of years with the classes. I don't think he's the number one pick in any of those drafts, but this is not any of those years. And I like what he brings to the table. I think he fits a lot of what they need because the Titans just can't continue on with Will Levis. I think it's as simple as that.
I have Ward at number 1 as well, and I think it's funny you mentioned that, just the caliber of the prospect he is, because I did a show maybe a week or so ago with Caleb Unger, and we did kind of going through the quarterbacks, and I don't think Cam Ward's like, something to ride home about. I do think he's going to be the number 1 overall pick. I think there's some things to be really excited about just in terms of how he plays, the zip that he has on the ball. But I think even if you put him in a draft like last year's, where you have some of the best college prospects that we've seen in recent memory, he's probably a mid first round guy, maybe even a second round pick. But I just think due to the lack of depth in this draft and how prestigious the quarterback position is, especially in the NFL draft, I think you're going to see Cam Ward go number 1 to the Titans. They need all the help they can get, and that starts at the quarterback position. Will Levis, just not it. I know he's exciting and he's athletic, but he's just not cutting it. He makes too many boneheaded decisions. I do think if Cam Ward decides to go to Tennessee, there's some things that they're going to be able to have to figure out. They're going to have to get weapons for Cam Ward. I know he's been streaming talking about how he loves Calvin Ridley and he loves the running back room, but the reality is they have some of the worst skill positions, not only just in their division, but in the NFL as a whole. So they're going to have to find a way to step up in that area as well. Just because, I mean, I don't know about you, but in my opinion, the NFL as a whole does such a poor job of developing quarterbacks, I think now. I think we're seeing a lot of young guys being rushed into situations where, like Bryce Young, you get thrown in to an offense, you have no weapons, you have poor coaching, and ultimately that just results in poor development. You see guys getting kicked out the door too early just because they don't have enough guys around them. What are kind of your thoughts on that?
No, I couldn't agree with you more. I think that's a great way to put it, where the NFL as a whole has just become such a win now mentality, right? Where you bring up Bryce Young, and that's a bit of a unique case in my opinion. When we think about David Tepper and we think about just kind of how, just to be frank, insane he is when it comes to no, I'm on my fourth coach in 3 years. I'm going to pay this guy, pay that guy, and he's not getting the job done. He didn't turn around this horrible roster that I have in 16 months, so he's out the door, sort of thing. Where I agree with you that everything has gotten to a point where you need to show, at least show something, right? Where, let's think about this as from the perspective of Patriots fans for 30 seconds, where, you fired Gerard Mayo for obvious reasons, but we'll see how that affects Drake May's development moving forward. But it's one of those things where you look at Drake and you say, all the tools are there to succeed. I look at Will Levis, I look at some of these other guys, and I say, you see the physical tools, but you haven't done anything on the field to show me that you're ready to succeed. And I think that we're in certain places, it becomes a case by case basis. And it all started, in my opinion, 6, 7 years ago at this point with Josh Rosen, where it was, yeah, pretty quickly you could tell that he wasn't it. And when the Cardinals decided, hey, we got the number one overall pick, we're taking Kyler Murray, that sort of signaled a big shift, in my opinion, in how the NFL views young quarterbacks, where all of a sudden it was, oh, they're comfortable taking a first round guy 2 years in a row. Yeah, that seems to be that's certainly not becoming the norm, but it made it a lot easier for some teams to move on.
No, I agree with you there. And I think that, a lot of times, sometimes you can tell within a quarterback in the first 2 to 3 years, like, are they going to be that guy?
Yeah.
But you also have instances with a guy like Mac Jones, where year one is a rookie, he's a pro bowler technically, and then year two and three are really a struggle, and he's, struggling to get the ball to weapons. He's not really reading the defense very well. So definitely a very interesting time to be a young quarterback. And I wish the best for Cam Ward. I actually like the way he plays. I know he's a Washington Cougar. I don't love that. But besides that, I think he has a lot of potential to change this Titans franchise around, but time will tell. Number two, the Cleveland Browns are on the clock. If you are Kevin Stefanski and company, where are you going here?
This one I've struggled with because some people are saying the draft starts at 2. I'm not a big believer in that. I think the top four are pretty set in stone here. I've got Travis Hunter going here. I think that this team just needs an influx of talent, and he's somebody who, whatever the plan at quarterback ends up being, you can find a way to have Jerry Jeudy and Travis Hunter on the field at the same time. And then it also gives you two top flight cornerbacks. How is that snap count going to be divvied up? How is that going to work out in terms of that development with that coaching staff? Who knows? But is he the best player in this draft? Yes, he really is. And it's a fun case. It's a very unique case of Travis Hunter. I think he's going to find a way to succeed. I'm just curious to see how he's going to get utilized by this coaching staff.
Similar to the Titans, I feel like the Browns are just one of those teams where wherever you need talent, like you have to get it. Like just
Yeah.
get talent on the field. The quarterback position for them is really interesting. I was looking at it and, is there a world where Shadur maybe goes number two just because of the fact that Cleveland needs a quarterback and Deshaun Watson's out and that whole fiasco? Maybe, but I think it's pretty unlikely. And I think, like you said with Travis, he's such a dynamic player, as we already know. He can play both sides of the ball. The biggest thing that I worry about with him is, obviously we know he's so great as a wide receiver and as a defensive back. But playing those two positions in the AFC North specifically is a daunting task, especially for
Yeah.
a rookie. Travis isn't the most built defensive back or the most built wide receiver we've ever seen. And so I think he's going to have to spend some time in the weight room. I think he's going to have to get bigger, probably get a little tougher, because when you're going up against guys like Marlon Humphreys and then you're playing defense against George Pickens or DK Metcalf, that's a tough day at the office.
Yeah,
And
it
so
is.
I think he's going to have to be able to, progress in just the aspect of being more physical with guys. And I think he's capable of that. But I think, if he struggles year one, year two, just whether it's injuries or getting banged up, I mean, he's going to be tasked with one of the hardest jobs in the history of college football if he plays both ways, which I think we all expect him to do. But I have him going to the Browns as well. I'm really excited to see how that works out for Travis. So at number three, brings us to the New York Giants, just a blunder of an organization right now.
Ooh.
Just moved on from Saquon Barkley a year ago. He's a Super Bowl MVP now. Kind of shows you where the Giants are at. Number three, I am going to let you take this one as well.
Yeah, I don't know about you. I really struggled here because there are several schools of thought here. The first one was, well, do you take the best player available? Because that's Abdul Carter. But I know there might be some questions about some of the medicals around him, which may have taken him off a few teams' boards. We're going to see how that shapes up on Thursday night. And then if you're the Giants, you also have to think about, well, hey, do we trade Kayvon Thibodeau? Where, you and I, as Washington guys, we'd probably be more than okay with that, right? But I don't think that's the route they're going to go. And I look at that quarterback room and I say, it's a 1 year deal for Russ. It's a 1 year deal for Jameis Winston. And I don't agree with it. but I think they're going to end up taking Shedeur Sanders. That just seems like the only logical position. I don't think they want to make this pick. I think we could say that about a bunch of teams in the top 10, to be completely honest with you. And I look at this and I say, this is probably the most logical solution for them to get that, that long-term quarterback of the future, where if Brian Dable shows he can develop him, hey, maybe all of a sudden he gets a little bit of a longer leash. And if not, I think this ownership group is more than comfortable moving on and, doing what we all kind of expect. And as much as you and I might disagree with that, is going the Deion Sanders route and just letting him coach his son some more.
Do you think that's the hardest job in football if you're the Giants quarterback coach and your room is Russell Wilson, Jameis Winston, and Shedeur Sanders?
Yes, but I would, give a year's worth of that guy's salary to sit in that room for one day and just listen to those guys talk for like 2 hours. I'm so curious as to what that might look like.
There's got to be a podcast coming out, right? I mean, it's got to
Oh, I
happen.
hope so.
I went a different route. I spent a lot of time on the Giants as well. I think from really 3 to 10 is where the draft starts, from in my opinion. And like you said, I think Shadur being in New York, I think he's a big market guy, which I think some quarterbacks aren't. I think some quarterbacks, some big time players strive in that smaller market situation. But I think with a guy like Shadur Sanders, I mean, this guy's been in the limelight since he was, 12, 15 years old, whatever it was back in high school. I mean, the guy's dad is Deion Sanders. And so I think in a big market, he would strive in New York. However, I have Abdul Carter going at number
I like
three. I think
this.
the sheer talent and the sheer dominance that you have, I think the Giants are a little trigger happy at drafting a quarterback as well after the Daniel Jones fiasco. I think that this organization would be much more comfortable, playing the 1 year rental with Jameis and Russell Wilson and trying to go sign a big name in free agency rather than swinging and missing on another quarterback prospect while you're still paying Daniel Jones nonetheless. I think Abdul Carter's nasty. I watched that game when Washington went to Happy Valley. And obviously, that Washington offensive line wasn't anything to drive home about. But this guy is ferocious. He is really a Micah Parsons carbon copy, in my opinion. And I just think he can do it all. He can play linebacker, he can get on the defensive end position. He can really just do a lot. And when you're a New York Giants team that needs help on the defensive end, especially, I think Abdul Carter's the guy you go here. You pair him with Kayvon Thibodeau. And then at least at that point, you have something that you can say, okay, these guys are our anchors. On the defensive side, our defensive line is going to be our most dominant position. And then you can work off that. You can build your secondary. You can hopefully bring a quarterback in that can be successful and kind of get a youngster in there with Jameis and Russ. Maybe you get a guy like Jackson Dart or Tyler Shuck or Jalen Milrow. Maybe a guy that you're not going to put, the organization on his shoulders, but you can kind of let him develop a little bit as well. So that's why I have Abdul at number three.
No, I think that's super solid. Where I don't think there's a wrong pick in that sense. Where if you're taking Abdul Carter, I look at the needs of this team and I say, especially when Brian Dable, Joe Shane, if they don't find a way to make it work this year, they're out. And even, if that is Russ, if that is Jameis in a short-term window, I think that's fine. Where whoever ends up starting for them, right? Malik Neighbors is going to get peppered with thousands of targets, it seems like this season. And I think it's one thing where when I look at just another thing surrounding just this whole Dion side of things, it's this do not draft list. Whatever that's going to look like, we're probably never really going to see what that looks like. And I think that the Giants are one of those teams that are at the top of the list of, hey, we want him to play here. We might hold out. I don't think that's ever really going to happen, but we might hold out if you go to, one of these teams on that list. Let's just say the Browns are on that list, right? And they decide to take him at two. I don't see that necessarily playing out the way that that camp would want it to. But I look at New York and I say, I think it's something that makes both sides happy. And especially with the way they've built this quarterback room short term, you bring up Tyler Shuck, Jalen Milrow, whoever else, Jackson Dart in this draft. I just don't see it with any of these quarterbacks. So if you believe that you can go get one of those top guys, why not do it and let that process play out? Because as we've seen over the last couple of years with both Russ and Jameis Winston, if it doesn't work out, like even in that 1 year, front offices have been okay moving on with them. And I think that's something that you might see with Shedeur Sanders if this pick comes to fruition.
That brings us to the infamous number 4 pick in this NFL draft. the beloved New England Patriots in an awkward position here. They had the number one pick in sight heading into the last week of the regular season. Blew it, so to speak, I guess. Yeah, I mean, that's a tough look. They bring in Mike
Painful.
Vrabel. They go crazy in free agency, still in a good spot with the top five position in the draft. Obviously, the offensive line is a huge issue here. I got a little creative with this pick. Um, I'm just going to let you know now. I'm going with Armand Membu out
I
of
love this.
Missouri. I like Will Campbell. I think the SEC offensive linemen are maybe as a surefire pick as it gets, but the small arms thing is it's scaring me a little bit. I don't know if that's, a real statistic or if that's just some stupid combine headline that they have in, February or whenever the
Sure.
combine is. But I like Membu. He's another SEC guy. He's gone up against all these monster defensive linemen and defensive tackles that the SEC has to offer. I think he's a little bit more well-rounded, and you can kind of put him wherever. Obviously, he's out there at tackle, but I think he can play left or right tackle. I think you may be even able to get away with him in a guard position, but I definitely think he's at his best on the outside. I think it's a creative move for the Patriots. I know a lot of people probably have Will Campbell. You might even have him as well. But I like the look here. I just think, you need an offensive lineman. I think if you go Membu or Campbell or even Banks for that matter, I think all those guys are going to be very productive starters in the NFL and have long careers. Just for the sake of mixing things up a little bit, being a little outside the box, I have Membu going at number four.
No, I love this. I actually thought about putting him there myself as well, where I was wrestling between him. I did go with Will Campbell. Where when I look at Armand Membu right now, I see somebody who has mainly played right tackle. And while I agree he certainly could flip to left, I'm of the mind that Will Campbell is the best offensive lineman in this draft in terms of a high floor player. Where I'm going to quote our good buddy Alex Katzen, who writes with me over at Huskies Wire, where he says, I'm letting Will Campbell fail left tackle first. Let's see what that looks like because we know worst case this is somebody who could be, like Peter Skoronsky a few years ago at guard, where he could be that level of player on the interior. And if he plays well at tackle, great. If he moves well, he's got the technique, he's got everything he needs to succeed out there. But if the arm length isn't cutting it, all right, kick him inside the left guard. That's fine. But at least give him that opportunity because I think, talk about trading down. I think the Patriots would be in a prime position to do that if there were other guys that people wanted on the board. But with the way this draft is falling, the way it just seems like everything is a couple of days before, I just can't help but take the highest floor offensive lineman in the draft because that's what Drake May needs. And I think Armand Membu has a higher ceiling, but I also think that if things don't work out the way that they should with him, that he's got a lower floor. And while I would be more than okay with that pick, I sit here and I say protect Drake May in the best way possible, and I think that's going the safe route.
I like that. And like you said, I think, it's kind of a win-win situation with these guys. I mean, especially with, these offensive linemen. At worst with Campbell and even with Membu as well, you're probably getting a mid-tier offensive lineman at worst. And that's something that I think the Patriots would honestly take right now. I mean, we all saw that offensive line last year. There's a reason they were hesitant to put Drake May on the field as a rookie and that they had, other guys out there. And that's because of the fact that this offensive line was terrible. And so as they continue to develop that, you bring in SEC talent. Hard to go wrong drafting offensive linemen from the South. Number five, the Jacksonville Jaguars, another organization that's just in a really awkward spot. Trevor Lawrence seems to be hit or miss. Will he stay long term in Jacksonville? Will he move on? We don't really know. But they have the number five pick following the Patriots. What do you have going on with the Jags?
I'm gonna quote another good friend of mine, my buddy Connor Rogers over at the NFL Stock Exchange podcast, where one thing that he likes to say with some of these early picks is some of these teams need to eat their vegetables. That's taking players in the trenches. And eating your vegetables, take Mason Graham, be really happy with it for a long time. That's just what needs to happen here. You pair him with Trayvon Walker, who, I didn't like that pick at the time. Still don't love it. Aiden Hutchinson's still much better than he is, but he's coming into his own. I like the way that they're able to move him all over the defensive line. You pair him with a guy like Mason Graham, you're you're not cooking with gas yet, but you're on your way there. I like the steps that you're taking if you go down that road.
I also have Mason Graham at number five. This is where similar thought process here. I think you have to be able to build in the trenches. I think a lot of times, these front offices get really caught up in the flashy guys that make these really nice catches, or they have a quick 40, or they're really fun to watch when they're in college. And not to say that those guys don't pan out, but I think it's much easier and probably more productive to build a team from the inside out, start in that
Yeah.
interior, whether it's the offensive or defensive line, and then build your way out. And Mason Graham's a monster. We all saw him in the national championship game against Washington. Brutal look there for our Huskies. And then obviously, this next year following that, he was dominant as well. And obviously, he was paired with a really good Michigan defensive line. I know they had their struggles in the season, but it's hard to be that good on defense when your offense is that bad. And Mason Graham's a force to be reckoned with. I think he's just, some guys are just dogs. I think Mason Graham kind of fits that narrative. He's just a nasty, tough guy up front. You hate him if he's not on your team. You love him if he is. And so I think he just brings a sense of nastiness to this Jaguar team that they probably don't really have right now. It seems like this organization is pretty directionless at the moment, however you say that word. And so, I think that, like you said, you eat your fruits and vegetables, and, maybe the Jags, they're not cooking with gas right now, but, maybe it's an air fryer. At least we'll start there. And so I
Hey,
think
there we
them
go. I like that.
going Mason Graham at number 5, I think that's a strong move. And that brings us into the number 6 overall pick. Another organization that's gone over a lot of change. The Raiders bringing in our beloved Pete Carroll. A lot of shakeup in the front office. They trade for Geno Smith in the offseason, so they have seemed to have found their quarterback at least, for the near future. What you got here? I feel like this could be a really interesting pick and really just interesting range from 6 down to 10.
All right, I ate my vegetables. I'm going with the fun pick here. Give me Ashton Genty. We know Pete Carroll loves to establish the run. And to be completely honest, I just think about this offense, just, from terms of me as a nerdy fantasy football player, thinking about Ashton Genty and Brock Bowers in the same offense just feels like so much fun to me. And I really enjoy what that could look like. Again, we know what Pete Carroll likes to do. He likes to establish that downhill run game. And why not keep Ashton Genty, in the same region of the country at the very least? And it's one of those things where, I could go Abdul Carter here and pair him with Max Crosby. That's probably the smart thing to do, right? But that's not nearly as fun. And I think that this is one of those things where we look back on this in 5, 6, 7 years, and if Ashton Genty, who's able to produce, even against big time competition behind that Boise State offensive line, can do the same thing behind a mid to not so great Raiders offensive line. Why not? Why not have some fun with it? You can figure everything else out later because Pete has shown he can identify talent in the later rounds, get some of those offensive linemen, get some of those other pieces that he needs around him. Why not have some fun at the top of the draft?
I have Ashton Genty as well at number 6. And I'm just
Yeah,
going to say this right now. I think he has the potential to be the next Marshawn Lynch. Like you
I
said, he's
like
playing
this.
with Pete Carroll. He's a physical back. He can get downhill. He's also a very sneaky receiving back as well. He can get out in the flat, make guys miss, run guys over. He has good hands. And so I think as his NFL career kind of unfolds, you're going to see a part of him that you didn't really see at Boise State. I think you're going to see him, develop a route tree, get out in the flats, make plays. Obviously, Geno Smith isn't going to be some career long quarterback that you pair with Genty. But once they get a rookie or a young guy down the road, I think this is going to be a really exciting offense. Like you said, you bring in Brock Bowers. Maybe you've improved the wide receiver position. You develop that offensive line. I think this team, I'm not going to say they're going to be a playoff team, but at the bare minimum, they're going to be a lot of fun to watch, especially if they add Genty to that offense. Pete Carroll, as old as he is, he's a very high energy guy who's fun to watch. He gets the most out of his players. And this AFC West division is really going to get nasty when you look at the jumps that the Chargers have made, and the Chiefs are going to be out for revenge, and the Broncos are making development. And now that you add the Raiders into this mix, I think it makes for one of the most competitive divisions in college football as well. And for people that maybe not know where Boise's at, because I know you mentioned keeping Genty in the same region. Boise State's in Idaho, all right, 20 minutes down the road from where I'm at right now. So if you don't know where Boise State's at on a map, I've heard a lot of people. I don't know where Boise State's at. It's in Idaho. It's a great place. Come check it out. Pretty awesome. So number 7, we have the New York Jets. I've said this about 4 or 5 teams at this point, but this organization is on fire as well. Not bringing back Aaron Rodgers, going with Justin Fields, bringing Aaron Glenn as their head coach. I have them taking Will Campbell here. I think you have to save Justin Fields. I'm a Justin Fields advocate. I really like him. I like the
Same
way he
here.
plays. I think he can be really good. He just hasn't been in the right scheme, and probably hasn't had the right coaching. And so I think bringing in a guy like Campbell, and like we talked about the Patriots, the development, it's going to be through the roof. I think that he can be a really strong cornerstone for this Jets offense. You can build around your offensive line, hopefully protect Fields, especially from his blind side. I think he just kind of upgrades the offense at least a little bit.
So I like where you're going with that. Similar train of thought here. Will Campbell is not on my board. Armand Membu is. That's where I have him coming off the board here. Same thing, right? Protect Justin Fields, figure the rest out later. You got some nice skill players. I mean, I guess Aaron Glenn is not a huge fan of Brees Hall, but that's a different discussion for a different day. You figure that out when you get a chance. You still have a number one wide receiver in Garrett Wilson. Put an offensive line around him. You're starting to build something there. You still got Elijah Vera Tucker. You've got some nice pieces up front. And I think Membu, I don't know if he's the piece that holds them all together, but it's just one of those pieces where you find a way to make it work with all those guys. You figure out that offensive line for a while. So you can start to just really build everything else and make some of those luxury picks. Get Garrett Wilson some help on the other side in round two, whatever it is you want to do. But you need to take an offensive lineman here.
No, I couldn't agree more. I think this Jets offense has been a disaster for a long time. I think they thought Aaron Rodgers was going to be the band-aid on the wound. Turns out it just made the wound worse. So it never gets any better for Jets fans, and I wish I felt bad for him, but I don't. So
That's the
number
right way to
eight,
put it.
the Carolina Panthers are on the board. Seems like a team that kind of found some momentum down the stretch at the end of the year. Bryce Young started playing some good ball. I think Xavier Legette is a really fun player, even though I never know what he's saying. I have them going with Jalen Walker here, the edge rusher
I
from
like this.
Georgia. Anytime you draft a guy that plays defense for Georgia, he's going to be really good as long as he stays on the field, he stays out of trouble. And I think that, this Panthers team, like I said, trending in the right direction. You add a strong guy on defense, he's versatile, he can do a little bit of everything. So I think Panthers go Jalen Walker here at number 8 and just continue to develop a pretty young team.
No, I like that a lot. Where I had a similar train of thought here. Where there's one edge rusher who, no, I'll get to him in a little bit. Whereas as I was writing this out, I was like, oh yeah, wait, hold on. I still have Abdul Carter on the board here. And I really do think we might see him fall a little farther than some people expect based on some of the medicals where, he's got the foot thing that he's dealing with. He was dealing with a shoulder thing during the year. I think that there are some teams that might be legitimately concerned about that, but he's not getting past the Carolina Panthers here. They need that help up front. And I think him and Derek Brown would work so well together. That'd be a whole lot of fun to watch. You got a whole bunch of different ways that you can utilize him in this defense. Was personally hoping he might slip a little more, get down to number 12, see him and Micah Parsons together, as you talked about a little bit earlier, how much fun that would be. But I think that he can't get past this pick. And now all of a sudden, Carolina, they're really starting to build something on defense. You signed J.C. Horn, he got him locked up long term. Again, Derek Brown is somebody who I'm a huge fan of. You start to got a couple pieces there that you can really build around.
No, I couldn't agree more. And I think that, especially with the Panthers in the NFC South, that's not what I'd call a really strong division. I mean, the
Yeah.
Buccaneers have won it the last couple years, and I love Baker Mayfield, I love Mike Evans, but that's not really like a title contending team. So I think the Panthers could stir things up this year, especially if they have a good draft, they develop their guys well through the offseason, have the potential to do something special there in Carolina. So number 9, we're going to go to another NFC South team, the New Orleans Saints. And this is where I have Shadur Sanders going off my board. Number 9, I think he goes down to New Orleans. I think it's a culture that fits him. I think he can fit in well here. I know they have a young quarterback in Spencer Rattler. I think Rattler's a great backup. I don't think he's any sort of career changing guy or franchise changing guy, if you will. I think Sanders slips a little bit just from my research. I don't think he had great interviews at the combine. I think the Dion thing is a disaster. And so I have him falling to 9.
Great backup is probably the nicest thing I've heard anybody say about Spencer Rattler in a good while. So you know what? Hats off to you, man. Props to that. I like where you're going there since I don't have Shador on the board. I thought that they could use some more help on the defensive line. Cam Jordan's starting to get up there in age. They invested in Brian Brzee a couple of years ago. I'm not too keen on a whole bunch of pieces on that defense. I think they're old. I think it's slow. I wanted to go Jalen Walker, like you had coming off the board at 8, but I talked about making things fun a little bit earlier. I'm going with Shamar Stewart. I'm a huge Shamar Stewart fan. I don't care that the production's not there. I look at everything that guy brings to the table and I say he's going to figure it out in the right scheme. And I think, everything that New Orleans has going on with their coaching staff, I think you can find a way to make it work with him. And, especially learning from Cam Jordan from a year or two, like that's going to be so much fun. I think those guys would work really, really well together. And all of a sudden, you've got that new cornerstone you could build around on the edge.
I like that. I like that pick as well. I think, with the Saints, the defense it has to develop. And I think it's interesting that they went with Kellen Moore, an offensive mind. That's why I went with Shadur, because I think
I
when
like
you
that.
bring in a guy like Kellen Moore, he played quarterback in college and in the NFL, great offensive mind. And so bringing in Shadur also helps. But also on the defensive side of things, that's an area that needs help as well, especially like you mentioned with Cam Jordan. He's not getting any younger. So brings us to our 10th and final pick in this mock draft. The Bears coming off Caleb Williams rookie season, great or not great, good but not great to say to keep it as positive as possible. This team still needs a lot of help, as we found out the hard way, and I have them helping out their quarterback Caleb Williams with Kelvin Banks going at number 10. I think he adds some help
Yeah.
to this offensive line. I think you help develop Caleb Williams by keeping him safe and healthy in the pocket, and that allows him to get to his weapons like our guy Romo Dunze. So I have Banks coming off the board at number 10, and that rounds out my mock draft. Who do you have going to Chicago
Sorry,
then?
I got one thing I have to add because I have to get this shot in here. I agree with you about Kellen Moore, offensive mind, getting a quarterback in. There's no way you're catching me talking about Jackson Dart in the top 10. That is absolutely not happening. Can't get anywhere close to that. Had to make sure I get in there. No, I also have Kelvin Banks going here to the Bears at number 10. I love that pick where, I've seen some Tyler Warren landing spots here, which I'm not a huge fan of. They invested enough in the pass catchers, right? You got DJ Moore. You have Roma Dunze. I know they don't love Cole Kmet, but they still paid him. And, all of a sudden you can look at, if you take an offensive lineman here, let's say, a tight end falls to you at 39 or 41. You can do that. You can draft a running back with one of those picks as well, where they've got those two picks at the top of the second round. You've so much you can work with there. Take an offensive lineman here. Help Caleb Williams build a strong, sturdy offensive line that's going to be around for a while because then all of a sudden, Ben Johnson has exactly what he needs moving forward.
I like that. I think that's a strong pick. Overall, pretty similar top 10 from the guys here. Couple mix-ups, obviously flipped the offensive tackles between Membu and Campbell. Couple different shakeups in there as well, but on the same page for the most part. So we are going to transition into our biggest sleepers in this year's draft. There's a couple guys that I think are flying under this radar that have been criminally underrated for reasons that I do not know. But I'm going to let you list off your guys first. Who do you think could be a sleeper in the first round? Who do you think could be one of the top targets on day two? Who do you like besides, the headliner names?
Oh man. So we went about this a little bit differently. My sleepers that I have here, I have some deep, deep sleepers. So let's start with the day two guy that I really like. TJ Sanders from Virginia Tech is somebody who I look at and I say, I just love the power that he brings. I think he'd be a really fun interior pass rusher where I don't think he's a three down guy by any stretch of the imagination. But I look at what he brings to the table, and we see the way the Eagles have rotated their defensive line in years past, where you bring him into a situation like that and you have him, hey, you're going to be the designated pass rusher. It's second and long. That's where you get a stop. We get a TFL on first and 10 or whatever. We get a sack. All of a sudden, you're coming in, you're pinning your ears back, you're having some fun from the interior. That's my first one. I got another defensive lineman that I got to talk about, who I think is one of the most athletic players in the draft, and that's Thor Griffith from Louisville. That's somebody who I would certainly keep an eye on. You look at all the combine numbers, everything he was able to post during his time with the Cardinal. Really like what he brings to the table there. And then Carter, let me throw the deepest sleeper you are going to hear at you. I'm talking about Thomas Perry, a probably UDFA offensive lineman from Division Three, Middlebury in Connecticut. A really big fan of him. I've heard some glowing reviews from the Shrine Bowl, from the Senior Bowl about him, where everybody was impressed with not only what he's able to bring on the field, in the interviews, everything like that, but in the weight room as well. This is a guy who's going to fit really, really well on the interior of some team's offensive line. Really hope somebody takes a day three swing on this guy, but the more I hear about him, the more I like him. Love getting some of these under the radar D3 guys like myself in there. So I had to make sure I gave him a shout out.
I love it. I love the creativity, especially, the D3, fine. I mean, that is down. You're looking deep for that one. I'm a D2 athlete myself, so I totally understand the small school connection. I love it. My list is a little bit more cookie cutter, so I apologize to our viewers. My first one, I have a Emeka Ibuka. I don't know about
Yeah.
you, but I haven't heard
Oh
a
yeah.
lot about him. I don't know why. He's a veteran wide receiver. He really was a mentor for a lot of people that I don't think, the audience understands. He was there for Marvin Harrison. He was there for Jeremiah Smith and, the million other wide receivers that have come out of Ohio State. He's been there for a lot of their development. And so I think for him, he's a great mentor guy. He's really mature, even though he's going to be going into his rookie season. I think he's still a first round pick, maybe an early day two guy. Maybe the Patriots take him in the second round. I'd love to see that. But overall, I just think that his development throughout college just shows how much willing he is to improve. I think he's a strong pick. I don't know where you're going to see him fall necessarily, but I think whoever gets him is going to be really lucky to have him. That's my first sleeper. My second one, another wide receiver here. I have Alec Aomanor out of Stanford.
Huge
This guy's
fan.
filthy. This guy's absolutely filthy. Go look up some tape of Alec Aomanor one-on-one with Travis Hunter. Absolutely mossed him on multiple occasions. Yeah, the head tap, 100%. When they were battling back in the Pac-12 days, this guy's a jump ball threat no matter where you put him in the red zone, midfield, on a deep ball. He's going to go up and get it. And so, similar to Ibuka, I think he can just do so much as a wide receiver, and he can bring a lot to an offense that people don't really appreciate. And so I think he's a guy to look out for, most likely on day two. But I think an offense is going to be lucky to have him. And then finally, going to go with somewhat of a local guy, Joshua Gray, offensive lineman out of Oregon State. I have a buddy on the team. Shout out Tiger Black. He's a defensive end. He had multiple matchups with Joshua Gray in practice. And he just told me the stories about this guy and how nasty he is. One of the best offensive linemen, really on the West Coast. He went under the radar just because of the fact that Oregon State wasn't really in a conference and it was the Pac-2 and for all these different reasons. But I think if he's on any other team that gets media coverage, he might be a first round pick. And so I think, this is going to be a guy that is going to be going off the boards earlier than people might expect just because of the fact of how big he is, how physical he is. And Oregon State, as small of a school as it might seem, they just produced a top 15 pick in Fuaga going to the Saints last year on the offensive line. So this is an institution that is used to producing offensive line talent. And I think that Joshua Gray is going to be the next guy to do that. So those are our sleepers. We're going to wrap up this show with our New England Patriots and what we want to see them do in this draft. They have one first round pick, a top second round pick, two thirds, a fourth, and a fifth. They have some sixth and sevenths as well. We're really going to focus on the first 5 rounds. We obviously talked about what we want them to do with the number 4 pick, but after that, where do you see them going with just the magnitude of picks they have on day two?
I mean, it's kind of fun because it's something you and I just spent a whole lot of time talking about with other organizations. This team just needs talent, right? I look all over the board and I say, all right, there aren't a lot of positions that I can see them picking in this draft, and I would say, why did you do that? Or, I'd see them needing a cornerback too at some point. That'd be really fun to see. Probably I'd say third round in terms of where the priorities rank, in my opinion, where offensive line is by far the top need because you need to help Drake May, which in my opinion puts wide receiver as probably the number 2 need. Where I look at that and I say, pick 38, my pipe dream is Emeka Egbuka, who I'm glad you mentioned a minute ago, or Luther Burden or something like that slides a little bit. And then all of a sudden, hey, you got yourself a really nice slot target. You can move Jalen Polk to the outside a little bit more. You can work some things around in that regard and just find different ways to do it. But I think about that. I think about, I love Kyle Duggar, but getting another playmaking safety to play alongside him wouldn't necessarily be the biggest harm in my book. Another edge rusher would be a lot of fun. I know they just signed Harold Landry, which is really great. Getting Milton Williams to play next to Christian Barmore on the interior is really great as well. But I look at this and I say the main theme of this draft needs to be help Drake May by any means necessary. And if that means trading up, which this organization just doesn't really do ever, great. Find a way to do it. If that means, hey, we're going to trade back into the first round, do it. If that means you want to trade down because somebody wants to come up for, let's say, Shador Sanders falls, or let's say Abdul Carter starts to slip and somebody wants to come up to four and grab him, great. You have to find a way to make that work because this organization is not in a position to turn down talent by any means necessary. And if you can find a way to get two first round picks to do that, to find a way to get, to Tyrone McMillan at some point, that would be a lot of fun. Where I think his stock is at a really great point where if you're able to trade back, there's going to be an opportunity to grab him and say, a guy I've been really high on and spoken with some people in Patriot circles about is Josh Simmons, where I look at him as, let's say you find a way to get into the mid 20s by any sort of trade back. Find a way to get Josh Simmons. There are so many different ways that you can help Drake May. And I think it's something that you and I are still getting used to as Patriots fans in this post Bill Belichick era of, I don't know what this is ever going to look like. I think that this year you're going to see a very different plan of attack because you know what the future holds. The future holds Drake May. I can't stress that enough. And you need to find as many weapons and offensive linemen as possible to put around him and help him out because you have your franchise.
No, I like what you said there too about the offensive side of things because I know it seems ridiculous. I've said this before, but if the Patriots spend all, eight, nine picks on offensive linemen and receivers, I would be happy
Great.
with that. Like,
Great. That's
that's
fine.
awesome. Yeah, like if I know the defense, obviously there's some holes or there's some areas of improvement, but they had a lot of cap space that they went and spent on the defensive side of the ball. There was, some top names on the wide receiver market, some guys that we had talked about, like DK Metcalf and, a number of other names. There were some rumors about AJ Brown as well. But they decided to go for somewhat of a cheaper option and a guy like Stephon Diggs. You bring in a veteran. You allow your younger guys to still develop a little bit. And so I know the Patriots organization has undergone a lot of change recently, but the thing that excites me about Vrabel is that he's a little bit more aggressive than Belichick and Mayo. And I think that, in recent years, we've seen organizations that have been more aggressive have more success. I think the Eagles are a prime example of that, where they go pursue and they're trading up in draft and they're making decisions that, maybe don't seem super logical at the time, but then they go and win a Super Bowl. I mean, they drafted five guys from the same school within a span of 2 or 3 years. And that ends up being their defensive core. And so I think, similar for the Patriots, are there guys that seem offensively talented that might have, some holes in their game? Sure. But I would much rather have that talent than go draft a long snapper from a JUCO in the third round. Like that's my mentality. That's how I look at it. And so we've seen how aggressive Rabel's already been in free agency. And so I think you're going to see a lot of that in the NFL draft as well. I wouldn't be super upset if we see a move where we give up 2/3 and a fourth for an extra second round pick, and maybe that ends up
Right.
being a tight end or another offensive tackle, someone of that caliber. And so, as much as the 2/3 and the fourth have a lot of value, I think you can also use that to flip. And if you don't, the Patriots have had success on day two and day three. As much crap as the front office has gotten for having poor drafts in recent years, especially on the offensive side of things, whether it was Mac Jones or N'Keal Harry or just some questionable decisions in the past, they've had great day twos and great day threes. Whether it's anywhere from that third to sixth round, they've developed guys that have become really strong contributions to the franchise. Ramondre Stevenson, a prime example of that. He was a day two guy. He comes in and he's able to contribute to that running back room. He's a starting running back now. And so, as much as they've messed up in the first round, I'm really interested to see how they attack the middle third of this draft.
Yeah, that's a really just intriguing thought because this draft does not have a lot of blue chip talent. But what it does have is a lot of solid contributors who can do a job. Like I think about it where, the Patriots have done a solid job building depth along the defensive line. Like if you wanted a blue chip defensive tackle, you could probably find one. But I'm just as comfortable paying Milton Williams because it almost feels like that's probably going to be a better option because not only have you seen him do that at the NFL for a long time, but it's just also one of those things where I just think that there are so many other more important needs. Where I want to circle back around to cornerback here, where a guy I think about, probably he's probably found his way up the board is Azariah Thomas from Florida State is one, Darian Porter from Iowa State is another. And I look at guys like that where, they're probably going to be day two guys, but I look at just names in that mold that are going to go in that realm between what 33 and 100, that day two mold. And I say this is where you can find a way to certainly make a huge impact on the future of the franchise because you need that offensive lineman, you need that wide receiver, and outside of that, it's are you going to find a way to take advantage of what you need moving forward and get a second, a third, a fourth pick in just on that day. And just it's an interesting thing about Mike Vrabel. I have so many thoughts that are kind of going around when I think about him because he's not as involved as Bill Belichick was in this process because nobody was, but he's done a really good job of making sure that he is part of the decision-making process and over the just the course of his career, the more I think about it, the more talent that he has been able to help identify, right? Whether that is AJ Brown, whether that is Derrick Henry, where that's not necessarily that hard to identify, but finding a way to utilize it properly is. And there are so many different examples of guys that Mike Vrabel has both identified and then gotten the most out of as a coach. Where I sit here and I look at this draft and I say, if you're able to get a couple of those guys in that mid rounds where the NFL draft analysts are looking at it after the fact and saying, this is a really solid draft. And then on top of that, knowing what Mike Vrabel can bring to this organization, I think that's just really something that is going to be an exciting thought for Patriots fans moving forward.
Yeah, and I mean, not only is it, the big names and the high draft picks that I think people should get excited about, but I think it's also the developmental piece, like you touched on, of, maybe we draft guys that, maybe fans have never heard of or guys that just fly under the radar. But a year from now, 2 years, 3 years from now, if they're a contributing factor to a team that's in the mix for an AFC championship or a team that's in the mix in the playoffs in general, then I think that that's going to be a common theme in the Vrabel era is getting big names, getting star power in Foxborough, but along with that is developing guys who maybe are flying under the radar a little bit. So those are our thoughts on how this NFL draft is going to go. Roman, before we let you out of here, you are covering the Washington Huskies spring ball right now. I'm a big UW guy, as our audience knows. Running the social media account for you, obviously that's been great. But what have you seen on Montlake this spring that people should be really excited about?
Ooh, there's a lot that I've been really impressed by this spring. The first one is the obvious one. And that's Damon Williams. This kid just has it. He's got it with the arm, he's got it with the legs. The more I watch him, the more I say he is certainly going to be that star that Jed Fish has talked about. He's got all the tools, and Jed Fish has done a really good job putting pieces around him. We haven't seen really any of the starting receiver core. Denzel Boston and Omari Evans have been sidelined with injuries for the majority of the spring, but it's allowed other guys to step up. I think about Rashid Williams as somebody who's going to really come into his own this season. The running back room looks great. Where Jonah Coleman coming back for a senior season. And then you got Adam Muhammad and Jordan Washington, who are two really exciting young guys to pair with him. So, you're not just having one guy shoulder the whole workload. The offensive line looks better. Paki Finau is a name to watch. I think he's solidified himself as the starting left guard. And the more I watch him, the more I say, yeah, that's going to be a future star, whether it be at guard or at tackle. He's just such a promising athlete on the interior that I think you're going to be able to do a whole lot of different things with him as his career sort of progresses. Moving over to the defensive side, I have so many thoughts I need to get out here. Where this defensive front is going to look a lot better than it did last year. That was one of the biggest downfalls of this group was through the back half of the season, you couldn't stop the run. You go out and you get Simone Pepper from Utah, who I'm a big fan of. Ontario Thompson has proven to be a really nice pass rusher so far during spring ball. He is a big, strong kid who I think is going to just do a lot of work for you along the defensive line. You made so many investments in the transfer portal in the front seven. Buda Alukta and X-Ray Alexander at linebacker look like they're going to be really nice contributors. And then I need to talk about Takario Davis at cornerback. He's practiced like 3 or 4 days, and then he got dinged up a little bit from what it seemed like, and he's been catching balls on the jugs machine off to the side. But I look at him, and I've been saying it. I said it on Lockdown Huskies. I'm going to say it here. I'm going to continue to say it throughout the course of the offseason, through the season, and into next year's NFL draft cycle. Takario Davis is going to be the first cornerback off the board in the 2026 NFL draft. 6'4", 200 pounds, moves so well, and reunited with John Richardson. who he helped put 16 pass breakups together during his sophomore season at Arizona. It's so rare to find an athlete that big that moves that well and has that good of ball skills. And I think about what he can be at corner. I promise you, if things go well on September 27th against Ohio State, all season people are going to say, "Hey, that Takario Davis kid, he's somebody we need to watch out for at the NFL draft at the next level. He could be a top 15, top 10 pick even because he's got that level of size, mobility, and just pure talent."
I'm glad you mentioned the Ohio State game because I am praying that that weekend frees up for me. I want to get up there. I want to watch this Huskies team because they are exciting. And I think last year, there was a sense of excitement in the fact that you have a new coach and there are so many question marks. And I think it unfolded kind of how a lot of people, at least, people that had been around the team in the offseason, expected it to go. You knew the interior was going to, have some holes to fill. You knew the skill positions were, good but not great. And obviously having that first year in the Big Ten really didn't help, especially with the gauntlet of a schedule that they had. But looking at this year, it seems, a lot more comfortable. And obviously, at this point in the year, no coach is going to come out and say, yeah, this upcoming fall is going to be really rough. But the sense of progress that this team has made, it seems really genuine. And so obviously, I don't want to put the cart before the horse because it is April. We still have a long time until the fall. But if you had to put a ceiling on this Washington Huskies team in 2025, is it sneaking into the playoff? Is it an SMU or an Indiana caliber season like we saw last year? Or is it, the bottom half of the top 25 and still making a bowl game? I mean, this team went, 6-6 with playing two different quarterbacks and not a great offensive line and really a lot of issues. So what does this team look like in 2025 if things go their way?
I was just asking myself this question yesterday, where I was sitting there and I was like, well, I can't, I shouldn't pick them to win this game. Going to Michigan, going to Wisconsin, that's going to be really tough. They might probably drop one of those games just because of how tough those environments are to play in. Then you think about the toughest games this season. It's Oregon, it's Ohio State, it's Illinois. All those teams come to Husky Stadium. So the more I look at it, the more I say I could see them in a perfect world going 10-2. I would say that that's probably the ceiling for this team this year, where I don't expect them to win all three of those games. Like if Ohio State comes into Husky Stadium and wins, or Oregon does the same thing, I'd much rather see Ohio State do that. But I see 10-2 as the ceiling right now, and I think that as Jed Fish continues to build this program, it's gonna be one of those things where maybe that might not be enough to get you into the playoff this year, but we're gonna see everything that Demond Williams has to offer. We're gonna see everything that this coaching staff is building and putting together, and then all of a sudden, you're still gonna need to replace some pieces next year. But your core, and especially your most important piece, your quarterback, they're all returning in 2026. So you can continue to see that progress moving forward. So I'd have to say 10-2. And with that, I think they'll be right on the edge of that playoff conversation, where I don't think it's going to be enough to get them in this season because I don't think they'll end up as, top three team in the Big Ten, most likely. But they're going to be a lot closer to that than people think.
That's what I like to hear. Roman, I thank you so much for your time, all your insight. It's been awesome working with you guys as well over at Locked On Huskies. And just thanks for joining the show. We really appreciate it. So be sure to go check out Roman, Locked On Huskies podcast, and the Huskies Wire. Locked On Huskies is anywhere you want to watch: YouTube, Spotify, Apple Music, Apple Podcasts. Wherever you listen to podcasts, Roman and Lars are there. So be sure to go check them out. Thanks for coming on, man. We appreciate it.
Carter, thanks for having me. And make sure everybody subscribes to Chop It Up as well. That's what it's all about. That's why we're here.
You heard the man. Have a good one, guys. Thank you.